it's such a pleasure and privilege to have Nadim with us. Tanya will be joining us. The empty chair isn't a prop. She will be coming up during the interview, so we're going to hear from her as well. But Nadim, CEO of Wow Toys, I think it's now a business that is in over 40 countries. You were awarded an MBE at the age of 35 for services to business, a successful businessman. And obviously, as we know from the press coverage as well, and we'll be looking at it in this interview, the bereavement and the death of your daughter and how that's led to the foundation of Natasha's Allergy Research Foundation. So many aspects of life, as well as this theme of faith. Let's dive straight in, and I'm going to hand over to Emily for the first couple of questions.
Yeah, so you came to Manchester Met University quite a few years ago now. Do you have any highlights or kind of favourite memories from that time?
Well, I can say it's coming to Manchester today. The last time I set foot in this city was about 20 years ago, and prior to that was 35 years ago. And it was a very, very different place then than I can see now. However, at the time, 35 years ago, I distinctly remember it was a place full of grit and soul, in the sense of a human soul, if you like, and had an extraordinary, vibrant music scene, really, really vibrant. And yeah, I remember going to bars, there were bars, certainly then, and places like the Corner House, and one could be having a drink and standing next to Take That. You know, they were there at the bar with you, because they were started somewhere, and they started in Manchester, and that was nothing unusual back then.
Yeah, so do you have any advice for students who might be starting this year?
Gosh, it's a good question, because this is such an unusual year that we're in, and even last academic year, it was probably, you know, it was like the Vesuvius moment for education, I think. What could I say? I could answer that in two ways. One without faith and one with faith, to make this more interesting, perhaps. So I would say without faith, my response would be, and this is how I would have thought about things before, the human race is designed largely to survive against all the odds, so many things, and have done through all the thousands and thousands of years. And one thing that in our DNA, all of us, is that actually we're great at surviving, we're great at thinking out of problems, and so forth. So in that sense, you have nothing to fear. You will persevere, and whatever it feels like now, as tough as it is, you'll get through it. However, I have a different way of looking at it, and offer a different way, and it'll be okay too. You have nothing to fear. And this, I might add, is something that's come to me in recent years, and that is to say, nothing to fear, because God is with you, always. He's always got your back. You can walk out there, in the light or in the dark, but God is there with you. You just have to ask for him to be there with you, and you will feel his presence, and he will protect you. And you will make it through whatever you're going through as a student right now, which is unusual, emotionally, mentally, even physically, and you will be just fine. Nothing to worry about.
Thank you for that encouragement. And certainly, I think when I look back on my university years, I can remember that first day being dropped off near the Gloucester Road in Bristol, where I was at UWE going, oh my life, how am I going to get through that? And actually, it's such an adventure and a journey through the peaks and troughs.
Yes.
And yeah, great words of wisdom there. Now, I'm intrigued. You obviously missed out on a career with Take That. In the bar, so you could have been the sixth member, or maybe the fifth if Gary had sprained his ankle. But
that's right.
You obviously moved into the toy sector. What was it that? And I know you started out, you were designing Action Men, which I just think is really cool. And did you ever improve the sort of slidey eye thing, or?
Yeah, well, that was a moment. That was a big moment for Action Man, yes. And it was, in terms of business, it really evolved Action Man and the market and the business and the finances of it. But I was, yes, responsible for designing most of Action Man, most of Cindy Dolls, My Little Pony.
Quite a range there,
huge dearth of toys that some people in the audience or some people listening right now may remember well, or even indeed their children. Maybe Emily, you still have some Cindy Dolls, I don't know. I fell into that somewhat by chance.
Yeah.
But it's a huge industry. It's worth about $40 billion a year, $20 billion. So half of that is the USA. Quite interesting. 300 odd million people, population in America, 7.5 billion people in the world. 50% of all the toys in the world are sold only to those 300 million people.
Wow.
And then the rest of the market, if you like, 20 billion, is spread across 200 other countries in the world. So it's quite fragmented. But America is really where it's at.
And what was it that drew you into, obviously, moving from toy design into establishing your own company? And obviously, looking at Wow Toys and the website, you can see a real passion for good, well-crafted, well-made, durable toys that are colourful and engaging.
Yes.
Tell us what triggered that, the setting up of your own company?
Well, to be quite candid and honest about it, I was quite brutal. I think back then, in my early days when I was, let's say, leaving Manchester here and going on to work, I had a real sense of entrepreneurialism, if you like, to set up business and to dream of something, as it were, and to go for it completely. I would say that was typical Richard Branson style of doing business, if I had to give it. However, that's all doing everything in your own strength, I might add. And I just really worked at every hour there was possible, because that was my dream. And I was very much wrapped up in myself and my own ego and my own arrogance. I think a lot of business people are, to be frank, and wanting to succeed at all costs. And I was a very, very driven and motivated person at that time. But at the same time, I actually really love design, which is, for me, somebody who uses their hands, basically. Growing up using my hands to make things, to do things, pottery, photography, sculpture, painting, and industrial or product design. Mind and hands work really together, and I was very much adept at doing the two. And toys, I had a real passion for toys, because I actually loved, and I am quite childlike, I have to say, in myself to a degree, quite immature, really, is the truth, and childlike, and quite, I want to say, stupid and foolish, to a lot of other people. And I love designing, creating things, and it really fitted with designing, creating things for little children, because that's how I almost felt myself. And there my passion lay, and that's what I decided to do.
Fantastic. And it's interesting, you've drawn out that will to succeed and that desire, that entrepreneurial spark and spirit to do whatever it takes to establish your vision and your view and the product that you want to sell. And obviously at the moment, economically, particularly for the retail sector, we're in tough times and uncertain times.
Yes.
So how do you measure personal success? And maybe that's changed over the years as well.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question, because there's again a double way of answering that. But I would say traditionally measuring success for me was never about money. I was never really interested in money for the sake of money, because I actually not really know what to do with it other than to spend it on making more money, if you like, or to invest into things. But I have never been someone interested in having a big yacht or very flash cars. To me, that had no value or sense. But what I was very interested was to build, certainly I'm going back to my, my former thinking, an empire, what I would call empire for oneself, which I can now look at as being something, frankly, very, very fragile in truth. And in the sense of God's time, it's almost nothing, if you like. But measuring success for me was all about having something, creating something where nothing had been created before, very physical, and having millions of people all around the world playing with toys and getting that satisfaction out of it, having bought them, obviously, and then that money flowing through to the UK from all these other countries. That was one way of measuring success. And also, I have to say, across other business leaders would recognize me as someone successful. Again, unfortunately, that comes back, I would say, to having a sense of overstated self-worth, if you like, and arrogance, which is a terrible weakness in truth, really. But now I would view it differently, that actually, I think all that I just mentioned really doesn't matter that much, to be honest. Really, success, I would say now, is doing whatever God wants me to do, and just following in that, and accepting 100% that if God wants me to do it, and somehow given me to do that, and however it's communicated to me, and I do that, I will be happy, because He is my Father, after all, and if He's telling me to do something, it's because it's good for me, not because it's bad for me.
Wow. Well, we will explore that a little bit further in the interview as well, but Emily.
Yeah, so of course at the moment things have really been impacted by the pandemic across all sorts of sectors and areas of life. So is there any lessons that you have as a business leader or as a businessman that you could share that you're really finding helpful in these times?
Yeah, I think most business people, probably the first time, and certainly for me, that I felt, I would say, traditionally really out of control, or not even out of control, a lack of ability to control what's going to happen next. So, having been someone who's sometimes would travel to 26 countries a year, you name the countries I've been there, etc., and you're largely doing that to make something happen, to nudge something to happen, and you feel that you're shaping it like a piece of sculpture. Now, that is no longer really possible, because the connections and the tentacles that once were there are broken as people's lives and communities, from Japan to Hawaii, really, and you name the place, the same with the whole COVID pandemic. A lot of things are broken as family units and economies are broken. So I really feel like now I'm in the river, just paddling and watching like that. And I would actually say it's not that bad to be like that. It's just being more peaceful. And if I had to say anything, to be honest about it, to anyone in business, I would say now, you know as well as I do, it's no point stressing any more than you have to, because you can't control what's going to happen. So just get in the river and paddle and do as best as you can, and enjoy it, oddly enough, while you have that moment. Yeah.
And practically with that, I mean, picking up on the stress, obviously you've got a team of colleagues and co-workers that you're looking after and responsible to and responsible for. I imagine as a CEO, there are easily some sleepless nights. And, the imagery of paddling sounds very nice, but at times I imagine it's quite frank and, full on, and it feels like the canoe might be sinking as well. How do you handle that stress, and how do you help people, particularly in your team, to cope with the stress?
Okay, well, something actually, this is a funny thing to say. So a lot of people actually say to me, and I think Tanya, my wife, will say it, people of my age go, how come you haven't got any grey hairs? For all the stress and the things you do, why haven't you got any proper grey hairs, like loads? I think, I have no idea. So, is it the genes? What is it? But that's just say that actually, while I have lived a very stressful life before, not least because of the traveling and the meeting of people and having to go through maybe 20 different languages a year, etc. That is quite demanding, actually, to say the least. And have a family, I should say. It's not just etc. But I think part of, I think, what I would say really, at work, we are going through troubled times. Definitely in the company. But all I can do is really say, since we're physically distanced, I should say, we have not seen each other for nearly 6 months. That's how it's been within the company. So, and we all know that Zoom and various other things are just no match for physical making a cup of tea for your employees. So at the moment, I'll be frank, at the moment, it's difficult times, and I'm not sure what I should be doing really, because I don't have a model to look at per se. Though other than, and I would say I do pray now, which I never used to do for my staff, even the ones that really annoy me, or traditionally would be annoying, and I would want to get rid of them as an employer point of view. I pray for them that actually that God, whatever their issues are, God helps them. And that's how I deal with it, and that's being honest. I don't have another mechanism other than that at the minute, really.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And as we move from the focus on your business leadership and business experience, and sort of now looking, obviously, as you've mentioned, the family life, being a husband married to Tanya and
Yes.
Natasha and Alex's children. Please just tell us a little bit about Natasha, who she was.
Yeah, well, if those of who are listening to what I'm saying, or this interview, this piece now, who are fathers, as in physically fathers on this world, will know that, children, often you take them for granted, but in fact they are really a gift. They really are a gift. Now, Natasha really was a bubbly, really energetic child. She was I saw so much of myself in her, and what I meant by that, she was daring, she was what I call go-getting. She would go up in a plane, we'd go up in a plane together, and she would take the controls and fly it. Age 12, she aged 15, she'd jump out of a plane at 11,000 feet and skydive, all manner of things which I would call gutsy, what you would call trippy. And for a father, for a man, as particularly me, this is a personal thing, who's been someone, as I sort of alluded to, who's always generally gone out to any country in the world, not knowing who I'm going to meet or what's going to happen, and just dealt with it. Quite go-getting, I would say, in that way, business-wise. She really reminded me of myself in that way. So she was full of life, loving, adorable to cuddle. And as a father, fathers who are listening, there's nothing better than holding your child, and your daughter in particular, close to you, and you can smell their hair, and really feel that warmth that somehow a daughter and a father have. It's kind of quite unique. And anyone who's listening and they have a daughter, I'd say, as fast as you can, go and hug your daughter now, and just no matter what, tell them how much you love them, no matter what they have done or haven't done. So she was an adorable child, and particularly had a real sense of justice. We all remember how she would always go and support the underdog. As we know, in schools, there's a lot of friendship issues and groups, and there's often bullying, and she would always stand up and speak and help the underdog. Yeah.
And obviously, life for her, there's a lot of love in the family, obviously, is a very close family, still is.
Yeah.
And that Natasha had, from a very young age, I think, 6 months, was it, that she had the allergic condition and the allergies. Yes. How did she manage, and how did you as a family manage with living with the allergies?
Yeah, so, there are 2 to 3 million people in the UK that have serious food allergies. Our family was one of those families, if you like. And from the age of 6 months, as when we found out by chance, she was 6 months old, that she had serious food allergies to certain foods, like banana, wheat at the time, dairy and egg, for example, and sesame seeds. All of these things we found out bit by bit through trial and error, actually by her nearly dying or having very serious hospitalization cases. So as most families do, they come to find this out through an iterative process, is all I can say, if I call it that. It's terrifying. But in a family, there's nothing more you love than a child. There's absolutely, there's nothing more precious than a child. And, we adapted completely. As every event happened, as we found out more, we removed these foods from our house, if you like, so it's not in the fridge or in the cupboard, etc. When we went out to a restaurant, which was not often, for obvious reasons of potential mistakes, I would, for example, go to the kitchen and actually walk into the kitchen and speak to the chef and look around and even ask, show me the oil you're going to use, and then I'd pick it up and read the ingredients. So in other words, we were very, very on point about checking everything, because it's a matter of life and death at the end of the day. And we lived a good life like that. We cooked very fresh foods all the time. So we had a very good life. Natasha was very happy. She ate very good food, generally. And so we coped with it well, though there were sometimes some slip-ups, admittedly, because it's a dangerous world out there. But we did really well, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously things changed in July 2016 when Natasha, aged 15 and a half, went on a flight to Nice with her best friend Bethany,
Yes.
which was going to be a treat for her.
Yeah.
And of course that memory is probably still very emotionally painful for you, but could you share some things about that?
Yeah, so it was in 2016 in July, as you say, and Natasha's best friend Bethany, who was 14 at the time, Natasha was 15, they decided they really wanted to go have a little holiday together, a break. And Natasha wanted to show her the sort of summer holidays that we as a family would typically have, which was in the south of France each year. And so we decided that the two girls, Bethany, Natasha, and myself, so three of us would go to France just for 4 or 5 days and stay in an apartment that our family has there. So, and it was for me, very routine in the sense that getting on another plane, again, it was like a taxi service for me in terms of the way I just worked with planes. So very normal experience, and being with Natasha and watching out for her foods and everything, again, very normal. However, it went very, very wrong, really shockingly wrong, that you could not believe as a father, as a parent, such a thing would happen. That we got caught out by buying a sandwich from a well-known sandwich chain in the Heathrow airport that had a label on it that said what the ingredients are, or what we didn't know, it was partial ingredients and not all the ingredients. And we would always look at all the food and check and so forth, and Natasha was adept with a really 20/20 vision to check it. She ate the sandwich, we boarded the plane, she started to feel really unwell. Clearly there was a problem, and as the flight we were now across France on a 2-hour flight, she started to get worse and worse and had problems breathing. And that was because she was actually having what's called an anaphylactic reaction, the most powerful kind of reaction you can have to something. In this case, of food, and it turned out to be sesame seeds. That sandwich was packed with sesame seeds, hidden, baked into the dough of the bread, that we had absolutely no idea about, because it wasn't mentioned or not even visible. It was poison, and in the plane, she couldn't breathe. And I was sitting next to her, and she was been listening to music, sharing a little, one of the iPod type earphones with her friend Bethany, and they're like 14, 15-year-old girls having a good time, but then it just took a turn and went really bad. She couldn't breathe, she started suffocating, and now as a parent I knew what to do, and I'd never been in this situation. We always carried, as do most allergic people, 2 injections of adrenaline called automatic injection pens. We went to the toilet quickly, and I injected her, and it made no difference whatsoever, which was a real shock, because that was supposed to be your insurance policy. This is the medicine, it reverses the reaction. It made no difference. It's like taken aback, and we're in the little toilet, cramped like this, and I said, Daddy, I can't breathe. And that was pretty much the final words she said to me before she died on the plane. I rushed back to the seat, I got the second pen, the backup pen, and injected her again. And at that point she fell unconscious, and that was the last words she ever said to me. Battled to save her life on the plane. Utterly horrific what was playing out. She was on the floor, dying, unconscious, and there was a junior doctor on the plane, and we were doing CPR, and I might add, I had, at this point, had no faith in God. I never have had. It's not how I've grown up at that time. And I was just willing her in my own strength to live. So, come on, I know you've got the power, the energy, the energy in your cells in your body, you can fight this. But she ended up dying on the plane in front of me. That was what actually happened. It was absolutely horrific. But then, words can't describe that really, what that's like as a father, as a parent, seeing your own child die in front of you in a prolonged and terrible way, and you can't do anything about it. And I'm going back to what I said, I've been always someone who believed in my own strength and ability to control what was going to happen next. And I was totally powerless, ineffectual, had no way of turning that situation around, basically. However, something extremely dramatic happened, really dramatic, that I was never for a second imagining or could have never even thought possible. As we were last attempts to keep her alive, paramedics, everything on the plane, etc. Just the whole vision went changed in front of me. It was a shock, actually. Natasha's body was on the ground, alive, just still conscious, fighting for life, rigged up to what's the machine called? CPR. The CPR machine, sorry, yeah, etc. And suddenly these 5 figures, which angels, appeared, just unbelievable, right in front of me, made of soft yellow light, bang, bam, 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 5, all moving like that, from head to toe, across Natasha's body like that. And in such detail, they were really like, I would say, human beings with wings, but the wings were certainly not feathers. They were made of more like what I'd call tessellated, so pieces like that. Not like anything like I'd grown up at art school, because I went to art school, drawing in the V&A Museum, all these cherubs, which were basic human babies with feathery wings on the back. You know, nothing like that at all. They were really like us in the sense that they're quite long and slender, but with the wings. And I was so taken aback by what I saw. And they were made of soft yellow light, in intense detail. And I was so shocked, what I saw, I actually realized what that meant. I think any of us, whether you have any faith or not, would know that's some kind of sign someone might be dying. You know, what is that? And I picked my hand up and just whooshed them away like that. It's not her time. Really with aggression, basically, because I was very pumped up with what was going on generally. And they just went like that, etc. All the light went, and Natasha was gone. So you can imagine, the long and short of that is, God sent angels to take my child's soul to heaven. Now, at the time, at that minute, right then and there, I didn't think that. I mean, I was just in complete play of the incredible situation that was going on. There were a lot of people there, etc. And I was holding up with one hand a bag of liquids, fluids that was drip feeding into her arms, etc. And so it was a really quite hot moment, but I remained very, very calm, because one thing, I think my background, as I said before, from business, is I do stay calm under pressure, really calm, because I've been in so many situations around the world. And I know as a parent, it makes no sense to get all agitated about a situation. It brings no benefit in that scenario. So I was very calm. I'd been talking to her non-stop for now, nearly an hour and a half since she'd lost consciousness. I was telling her to keep at it. Can you hear my voice? Your father, meaning me at this point, is with you. I'm here. You are not alone. So I was very calm. And then this vision, this powerful thing, filled up my whole my whole sight. It was remarkable, yeah.
I just give you a moment to pause there, and I'll invite Tanya up as well if Tanya wants to come and join us up here. What you describe is, I can't imagine it, both the chaos as well as, and when you spoke on the Radio 4 program last December, there's something profoundly, dare I say, peaceful as well within that vision you described and that encounter. And I can't begin to fathom as a father the feelings, emotions, everything going on at that point. And obviously, Tanya, you and Alex weren't there on the flight at the time. When, just out of interest, when was the first time that you heard from Nadim? Was it in France? When did you receive the news? And obviously for you, how was that experience?
So Nadim called me just as the plane landed and said, "You've got to come out here straight away." Natasha's really, really ill, and you need to get to France, you need to get to Nice now. And I just couldn't understand it. I just dropped them off to the airport literally just a few hours before. I just got home, and I was just doing odd jobs around the house, and it just seemed like 5 minutes ago since I said goodbye. And I couldn't understand that at all. I didn't quite believe it, and you absolutely insistent, get a flight, you've got to come now. And Bethany, Natasha's best friend who was on the flight, had called her mother, Julia, who was in church. And they're a Christian family, and it was actually Natasha's church. And the whole church prayed for her. We're praying for her all afternoon. So I was talking to Julia on the phone. She was calling me, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's happening? I said, well, I'm getting a flight. I managed, it was the first Sunday of the summer holidays, and I managed to get a seat from Stansted Airport. Yeah. And it was leaving at 6 o'clock that evening, and I was in the gate, and we were told that it was going to be delayed by another 6 hours. And at which point, it was about an hour after that, I had a call from Nadim, and he said that I have to say goodbye now, that her heart's going to stop any minute, and I have to say goodbye. I've got to hurry, because he wanted to call her brother, Alex, who was staying with my mother, and also grandparents, so that they get an opportunity to say goodbye to.
Yeah, what that was actually, just to kind of clarify, that was in the hospital. So this was some hours after, so she'd been rushed to hospital in a hopeless situation, really, in the ambulance, and put on life support, but was in effect called clinically dead already, as far as medical language speaks. And what Tanya's saying is they were switching the life support off, and the last traces of heart blips on the monitor, the minute as they were, which they attributed to electrical activity from the drugs given. And as they were about to switch that off, that's when I made the calls to various family members and put my mobile phone next to Natasha's ear so that she might have a chance to hear.
She had no brain activity, and
it's just
complete organ failure.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just,
Yes, it's catastrophic, the organ failure. Anyway, and in the context of this, and I think we know, and I know that actually she left this earth, her soul left this earth before that moment, really. And it's when on God's time, not on our time, if you like. Yeah.
And even as you speak there, God's time, not our time, her soul, the church praying during this chaotic, painful period. Nadim, you've already said that you weren't brought up in a religious household. I think in previous interviews you said God's had no functional place in your life, not even in the background.
That's right.
So as we move to just explore this faith aspect, can you describe what was going on? I mean, Tanya, you've mentioned that you've had the connection with church, and Natasha was involved in the local church where you live and where she'd been going with Bethany. But
that's right. She always wanted a best friend, and she prayed for a best friend, and she had a child's faith from school, I would say. I was a Christian. I was trying churches, but I wasn't finding my faith. So I was kind of looking around that time, but she had a deep sense from somewhere, and it wasn't really from me. I think it was more from school, that there's a God. And she prayed for a best friend, and lo and behold, Bethany became her best friend. They became best friends at school. Mm-hmm. And Bethany's father's a pastor, and they are a very Christian family. And Tashi started going to youth group on Fridays, and they invited her when she was 12 to New Day, which is a Christian festival in Norfolk. And she went to that, and that's when she became a Christian. She absolutely fell in love with Jesus on that trip, and she came back, and she was just shining with joy. But she carried on. She didn't go to church every Sundays. We were trying to go to a local church, which was quite can I say, boring at times for a young person, and she didn't really like it. So it was just a faith that she had found. And then she was going to youth group on Fridays as she got older, and she had lots of good friends. And then she started going to church on Sundays. And we couldn't understand what's happening. She's going to church every Sunday now. She's going to the services.
And for me, I should say at this point, I wasn't interested in the least, frankly. You know, I mean, I just, you know, it's true. I must speak the truth here. You know, I really wasn't interested. Didn't really want to hear about it. I wasn't anti it, don't get me wrong. But it's of no interest. God had played no part in my life then. And again, coming back to it was, you know, this world is whatever I make it. I build it myself in my own strength. And I was never reliant on anyone other than myself. So in that sense, at that point, what was going on in the family, that particular dynamic, I didn't really sense it, if you like. It wasn't on my radar, per se.
And I think, Emily, do you want to sort of explore that further in terms of Tanya's openness, but Nadim's sort of pushing against?
Yeah, how did that play out within your family then? And did you feel like when Natasha came to faith, did that change anything?
Well, not... Again, before what happened, no, it didn't. I would say, becoming more and more unhappy in life, definitely. I mean, I think we'd say that. And because, you know, trying to make the world and build the world yourself is a complete joke, to be frank. You know, only a fool would do that. I can look back at that now and say that. And I was a fool. And because you never really achieve what you want to achieve. So it's actually, you're setting yourself up to fail in that way anyway. But you're delusional. I was delusional about it. And I was obsessed.
Your
it took up
energy, didn't it?
It took up all my energy and more, that it became the vicious demon that consumes you, and you just won't let it go. You know, it's got you and it's taking you that way. And therefore, as a result, you'd miss all the other things. Let's call it the good things that are around you, and they're forever present. It's just a question of whether you want to see them and acknowledge them, really, at the end of the day. You know, even right now, in anywhere outside this church as well.
It's actually in the family, what was happening at that time. I started going to Natasha's church because I wanted to know what was happening, why is she going to church all the time? And I went, and I couldn't believe what I found. It was just the most incredible place. I joined a life group very quickly, and I was praying for you, praying for the family, and
thanks for praying for me. Yeah.
And Natasha was, you know, just this, you know, incredible. She was quite quiet about it. She was just still finding her own faith, but she was strong in faith. And it was just interesting because the whole family, I mean, she also brought her brother to faith. So her brother, when she was 15, she was already 15, he was 12. And one of the things she said to him, I want you to come to New Day this summer. And he absolutely didn't want to go. I don't know anyone, I'll be on my own, I won't like it, it's weird, no, I'm not going. Please, Alex, please. And she would not give up. She absolutely wouldn't give up. And eventually he succumbed because she's older than him and he had to. And he went, and she died in July, and he went to New Day in August without her. But her friends just circled him and came around him and loved him and looked after him in a way that we weren't able to. We were so traumatized at that time from her death, and that's when he became Christian.
So that pastoral support and friendship was key.
It was very key.
And a provision for Alex at that point.
At that time, and if she hadn't have insisted so strongly, he wouldn't have gone, and he would never, certainly wouldn't have come to faith that summer.
Gosh. And Nadim, we were chatting earlier about the rage, if anyone has a right to be angry at God, and obviously we haven't got time to go into the complex issues around suffering and God's goodness and so on, but what was it that convinced you that move from disbelief or rejection of faith to you were baptized in 2018, I think, and you call yourself a committed follower of Jesus. Yeah.
Well, I would say I would die for him now. You know, if you ask me to put my life down right now, right here, and I'll do it because I know that's what he wants, and I know I'll be going to heaven the great place, as it were. So I'm now very much invested in it, yes.
Can you just share something of that wrestle,
Yes.
that struggle, and where you found peace?
Yeah, so it was a real struggle for me, having witnessed my child die in front of me, which is just the most abhorrent and terrible thing. And then, having to seal her own coffin myself for transport on an aeroplane in a special lead coffin to come back to the UK. It's so shocking, all of that. That and all the horror, the visual horror in my mind, played an awful lot. And it built up into a real rage inside me. And I swore a lot at God. I blamed him entirely for everything, was full of expletives and so on. And I shot up like that in that rage. But then, incredibly, we went to church, Natasha's church, the one we've been talking about. And I hadn't really set foot in the church really at all in my life, actually. And just surrounded by hundreds of people, effectively, who I'd never met before. Knew nothing about them. They didn't really know me. And they had an incredible love and compassion, if you like, didn't they? For us all, but for me as well, particularly in this, to answer your question. And I found it so incredible. What had I ever done for them to deserve that from them? I'd never given them something in return. And they were asking nothing of me as well. And I found that human experience, if you like, so overwhelming, in a good way, I should say, that it actually brought me to my knees, to be honest, that there was so much good in people. And all I largely had experienced for the last 25 years of my business life, I would say, was the dark side of people. People always trying to get one over you or abuse you in some way or beat you up in the business sense of that. And here I was experiencing people who don't know me, an outpouring of love and support. And I mean really genuine, not just a few words. And that really helped me, I think, or brought me on a journey, unconsciously, obviously, to have kind of faith back in people as well. Yeah. And that also helped me to heal, I think, myself and not feel so completely responsible for all the mistakes and everything in the whole world. Because I hated myself. I really hated myself, and I didn't think myself worthy of living.
I think it was the teaching at church as well on Sundays. You had a lot of self-hatred, you had a lot of guilt.
Yes.
You felt you were to blame, and you felt you were a horrible human being.
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah.
And I think at one point you were quite suicidal.
Yes,
as well.
Absolutely. I was really hell-bent, actually, if I say that, on killing myself. And I think had there been a gun around, like in some other countries there are guns, I would have just put it to my head and shot my brains out, thinking I am doing the world and my family, oddly enough, a service by getting myself dying, getting rid of myself, and then allowing other better things to happen because I have no value. That absolutely is how I felt.
But a lot of people were praying for you.
Yes.
And I think when you started praying yourself, which it just suddenly turned. It's really strange. Yes. It just suddenly turned. You started praying and you realised that you are forgiven. You are not a bad person.
Yes.
Everything that you were is because you were a hurt, broken man trying to do the best he can in this world.
That's it. Yes.
And I think your faith came, it seemed to come slowly. It sort of seemed to do that, and then it just did this.
Yeah.
Didn't it? It was like God had you.
Oh, yes. If you imagine a journey, it was from a terrible, terrible place. I got on this train, or paddling along, or being paddled for, I should say, by some. And it went from station to station, and each station I picked up more good stuff, more goodness, that actually I would say built me up from the inside, nothing to do with the outside whatsoever, from the inside, that ended up coming out and being, I would call it the new me in a way, a kinder self, a much kinder self to myself. And being kinder to myself, I was able to be kinder to other people and give compassion back out to people. And the aggression and all those sort of the bad things just sort of withered away, and the good came out, if you like. And that's why, more than ever, I really realized today, or in recent times, there is so much good in every human being, no matter what you see of them, no matter how terrible they come across. It's just they were probably people like me before, wounded, like an animal wounded, and shows its teeth and bites back. But if you can get past that, underneath, there's so much good in people. The good that God wants to come out, really, have come out.
And it was allowed to come out.
And it was allowed to come out, yeah, that's right.
So that forgiveness, the experience of being in a community at church, the teaching, the looking into Jesus, sort of, it sounds like there was a gradual growth and progression as opposed to knockdown argument number one, knockdown argument number two, the experience you had on the plane, but this sort of more of a collective and progressive sort of journey into finding God to be your loving Father.
Absolutely, and I think, I became more a loving husband, would you say? I mean, you say I wasn't always a good husband.
No.
I mean, there were times you've told me since that actually, and I'm sure this is, for a lot of people listening, they might look on and say, oh yes, maybe me too. I wasn't a great husband, I was just a bad listener, and all sorts of things, wasn't I? Aggressive and so on. But anyway, that's the old me, way past. It's amazing just how the power of learning about God, learning particularly about Jesus, and I have to say, all that is in the New Testament, if you like, that we've had, or I've certainly experienced through going to a church every week for the last few years, has been transformative. Yeah. And the people in the congregation also talking about it as well, have been really like a church family, has so much value. I think church family sounds such a short sentence, but actually it has this much meaning. Yeah. Now I really appreciate that. Whereas when I was here in Manchester 35 years ago, I would mock completely the Christian Union. Emily
would be the butt of the jokes.
Absolutely. I had a girlfriend here at the time, and her friends were all Christian Union people, though she wasn't. And they were always hanging around, and I couldn't stand them, basically. And now, I'm sorry, Emily. Yeah. No, I'd say I really understand that, but it's taken me that long and my journey to look back and see now at what the value of all that is.
And it's a constant learning. I mean, I suppose I heard a preacher say once that he had a vision. He was trying to kind of hurry up and get his wife to be a proper Christian, were his words. And he had a vision that his way wasn't the right way, and the way Jesus does it, he would be pouring water gently on her head and just washing her really gently and not rushing, not sort of hosing her down, that kind of washing. And I think that's been your journey. It's been gentle. It's been completely empowering for you to be who you really are. And I think but it hasn't been forced, it hasn't been pushed on you. It's happened at the right time, and you've just been able to sort of grow really well with everything that's happened to us since.
I would say, without having gone through the trauma, I wish I could have been a much more Christ-like person, if you like, a Christian, a follower, much earlier on. I think I could have. I think we all, as a result of being like that, but for myself, could have actually delivered so much good, kindness, and so on, and we all play that part as an ingredient to make the world and the society such a better place for more happiness and more joy. There's no doubt about it. Fighting it just creates more badness, and perpetuates that cycle, basically, doesn't it, of non-stop bad weather, if you like. And no one, so many big business people I've met, huge business people, they're not, they have a profile in the media, but they're not in the least bit happy. They're, like me before, they're just, where they have £1 billion or a yacht that's 400 meters long, it's not long enough. It needs to be 600 meters long with 2 helicopters, one on this end and one on this end. It's never enough. But actually, incredibly, just God and Jesus is enough for us all. That's it. Nothing more needed on one's plate. That's it.
Wow. And to hear you say it with such conviction and clarity, we can sort of sense transformation. And there'll be a few questions. We've still got time for a few questions that are coming in. So as we move, it would be good to just finish with looking at Natasha's foundation. I know I'll bring Emily in to just lead us into that.
Yeah, so obviously things have changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. So what has it been like trying to, or starting Natasha's foundation, getting the law changed? What's that kind of been like over the last couple of years?
Well, through Natasha's, through Natasha's inquest, which we never managed to be such a huge media event a couple of years ago, so much so that the Prime Minister talked about it, even Theresa May at the time, and most of the government at the time, and indeed many others. It became such a big thing, reported on all around the world. Surprisingly, in a way, it wasn't something that we'd imagined. That gave us, we realized, a really unique platform, basically, to try and bring about change for good for people like our family who had serious food allergies. We became aware suddenly that more and more children and people in the UK, let alone the rest of the world, were dying from food allergies. Buying something in Byron Burger, dying. Buying something in McDonald's, Wagamama's, and so on and so on. And it was not really reported on. It was Natasha's case that just hit the headlines in such a big way. So we thought what do? We either do something or we do nothing. That is a choice in life, isn't it? To hunker down and fret and feel wounded, or go out and face it. And I think with God's help and that faith with God, lead us, God, take us, what should we do? He drove us, I say, and told us, deliver some good, do something with this situation. And so we started Natasha's charity just over a year ago. And we met with a lot of the senior government ministers, and we met lots of very powerful people who and we put our case forward. And even with government, some of the big people today, when we're talking to government, we bring God into it, which is really unusual for ministers to hear that. But it's interesting because you actually see their body language change completely, because they're not expecting to have God or Jesus brought into a conversation, as it were, and they listen acutely. And anyway, through, I must say, we hold hands and we pray, we ask God to walk in the room before we go in the room, and we know He will, and bring about these big changes. And so we're working on areas of law in the country, changing the law. Natasha's law is one of the biggest changes to the law in the food industry for the last 10 years that affects all the big food chains. And we're working on education to change the whole national policies of the government, the way food allergies are looked at within schools. And we're working on probably the toughest one of all, is scientific research. Yes, I think God's giving us resources and finances to be able to make that happen, which is remarkable, actually, in a time when most people are struggling charity-wise and so on. And so we're going to start some of the biggest scientific research projects in the UK into food allergy, working with 6 universities all in one go, including Manchester, actually, and so on. So we feel very empowered because we have God's breath in our sail.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, and that must have, in some ways, some parallels with some of the other struggles that are going on in society at the moment. Is there anything that you kind of have to say about finding hope or keeping going and finding motivation and drawing strength in these times, and how does that affect how you go about trying to make a change?
Okay, well, I'd say, I'm just a human being. I'm a child of God, or we all are, but I am no different than anyone who might be listening right now. I am no better or no worse. I'm as equally sinful in my past and probably continue to sin every day in ways that I apologize for, but I'm not consciously. I don't want to sometimes, but it happens. Like all the people listening, and the story you just heard from us just now, if that transformation can happen to an ordinary human being, and an average Joe like me, in effect, and that's how I see myself really now, then of course it can happen to anyone else. There's nothing unique really about what's happened to us. It's just that we're able to actually voice it, whereas a lot of other people are not voicing things that happen to them. If it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. and meaning the good can happen to them. So whatever I'd say people are going through in their lives, and I know there is some terrible things happening in terms of death and so forth, and a lot of pain, but know that God has this incredible ability to transform people's lives. I think the question is, you just sometimes have to pray and ask for it. And I think that's what we do, don't we? When we ask through prayer, and we are, to be honest, expectant to receive some kind of response. Might not be really the response we want. It's not like a deal that we do. We ask and we get. It's not a transaction. But we know that God, and we've had quite a few supernatural experiences beyond the one I described about the angels. So we really do know that God listens and hears. It is palpable. So just literally, wherever you are now, I just put your hands out and pray and ask, and you shall receive. And it's so true. It's so simple. It seems unbelievable, but it's completely true. And that's amazing, because it's free. It's 100% free. And yet we don't really deserve it in a way, because we all feel so bad about ourselves in terms of guilt. But actually, as I've come to learn, or we've learned that, through the death of Jesus Christ, our slate has been wiped clean already. And we can go out there and live our lives to the full with God behind us, And that is truly remarkable. My father was a Muslim, basically, and my mother was a bad Catholic. In other words, somebody who had lots of bad experiences through the French Catholic Church, which was quite brutal in its time. And if this can happen to us, and it can happen to anyone. There's so much good out there.
Yeah. And Nadim, there was a very sincere and a brilliant question, one that I had scribbled down earlier as well. What would you say if an atheist described your encounter with the angels particularly as a product of the mind in distressing circumstances, a response to that trauma?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the sort of thing I would have probably asked, actually, or said, quite a few years ago. So I can kind of understand why someone would say that. Well, my response would be that the people that know me, and there are a lot of people in different circles that know me, will know that I'm actually, as a business person, or as a type of person, very balanced normally, and very calm. And I know myself to be like that in hot situations or difficult situations. And I also know that what I saw, the angels, I saw in such detail at that moment that actually, very shortly afterwards, I actually wrote it all up. I wrote about it all, basically. So I know that it wasn't something that happened to me some days, weeks, or months later, for example. It was very much in that moment. And also, I have to say, at that time, I was not asking God for help when my child was dying in front of me. I found very far from it. It was in my own strength. So I wasn't looking for such a thing and then projecting it in my own mind. More than that, it's difficult to answer that question other than to say that it's not the only time that things like that have happened to me since then. And it's so remarkable and palpable that these things are from God. And many people have come to me, having been public about it, to say they've had other situations themselves. So there's a body of evidence for it, if you like.
Yeah. And Tanya, I mean, we can come back to that. There's a few more questions on the business element, and I'm sure there's more that could be said in response to the skepticism. And again, I think you shared with that progressive, gradual sort of awareness and looking deeper and deeper into what happened, that maybe there are always answers and questions that we still need, but that was progressive. For you, Tanya, as well, looking at the foundation and what we've just watched, we've had a question in from a parent with a young child with allergies as well, relating to your experience as a family as well, and asking the question, what can they do to both be supportive of the foundation's work, but also maybe, again, some lessons around living as a family with allergies?
So what was missing when Natasha was small was there was no hope in a cure. There was no research to speak of. It was just take this medicine if she has a reaction and hope for the best, which is just unacceptable, especially after what's happened to us. So the foundation is there to give hope, and the things we want to do are all the gaps that exist that are not being met. So we're not just an information service, that's not what we are, but we are funding research. That's number one. And as Nadim explained, we're looking at the holes in the law, and we want to tighten all the gaps where people fall through and can have terrible accidents with terrible consequences. So I would say sign up to Natasha's Army, which is on the website. You'll receive a newsletter. I do regular blogs on what's happening. They'll be kept up to date with any campaigns that we're going to run that will need public support on. There'll be a lot, and she's more than welcome to send an email. I go through all of those and I'll reply to her as well directly.
Superb, thank you, Tanya. So, Nadim, moving back into the business sphere, great question here. Is there a danger of Christian balance blunting entrepreneurialism? And would Wow Toys be as successful as it is if you'd always been a Christian? So I think underneath that sort of, Christians aren't risk takers and, maybe...
Well, it depends. It's a good point. What are people's idea of risk, really? So you could say, yes, the classic idea of an entrepreneur is a risk taker, Richard Branson or any number of people, just as, there are many, many more. And you say, well, they're successful because they're risk takers, actually. Well, I would also say, actually, when Jesus was here on this planet, 2,000 years ago, he was a risk taker. I mean, who at that time, who else could be called, anything but a risk taker? He was so disruptive. He said the things that so many people did not want to hear, actually. And I say, in many ways, he's probably the first sort of modern, kind of entrepreneur I would now look at, as successful, because the result of that wasn't so much financial. The result was the spread of Christianity in the church, and that is, a form of currency, if you want to kind of make a rather simple sense of comparison to business. But I would actually say that had I had the Christian faith earlier, in all probability, if you want to use a sort of a business word, but I believe that actually the business would have been far more successful than it is today. Because one, I would have been a better father, a better human being, if you like, and would have given more to my family and to those around me, even the people I don't know, in terms of love and compassion as a brother to them, But also, I think God would have taken me on a journey that would have led to many other things and many other forms of success. And those other forms of success, don't forget, success is still success. It doesn't just mean money. There's many forms of success, in a way, or things to say, that's fantastic, that happened. I can't begin to fathom what those might have been, but I would absolutely bet on it, if you use a business word, that it would have been far more successful in a more rounded way, rather than in a singular way, which was much easier to topple.
That's a fascinating way of looking at it, and a very bold assertion as well, and hopefully one that will be played out over the years and decades ahead. And just finally, one for both of you, again picking up the issue of family life and business. Have you any advice for financially successful Christian with young family caught between impact of stress on faith and family life and wanting to provide for family and Christian work? So a bit of a tension there around that work-life balance, but also the different responsibilities.
Wow. Okay. So you have become, the time you give to your family now is completely different to what it was before. I work solely on the charity. Nadim works 50% on the charity, I'd say. And you do long hours because you also work with Wow Toys, don't you? We're very much a team with a charity. What I would say is, if you give it to God, whatever your worries are, he will find a solution for you. And I'll just be really quick in explaining that after Natasha died, I sat on the sofa for a year. I literally sat on the sofa for a year. And then Nadim was saying to me, look, you've got to come to work. I was working at Wow Toys as well. You know, it's time, you've got to, you can't just carry on doing this, come to work. And I would go to work and I would be crying and I'd be saying to God, I don't want to go to work. This was my life before Natasha died. I want something else. You can't just make me do this for the rest of my life. Please, God, what else is there? And I didn't get an answer straight away at all for another year. And now I've got Natasha's foundation. He's answered prayer. Obviously, I would much rather my daughter was still alive. I don't believe that was God's work, and that's a whole other conversation. But he has picked up my brokenness, and he's given me something that can make me whole. And so for people who are struggling and who don't know what they should be doing and how they should be doing it, if you're a family, you're a team, you work together and you pray and you put God first, and he'll look after you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to say, I think in our journey as Christians, we've come across, which is very new, certainly for me, and a little bit longer for you, perhaps, Tanya, but we've come across all sorts of people who would say, I'm a Christian. And I've come across this idea that there are such things as lukewarm Christians and more fervent ones. And fervent, I don't mean aggressive, but have perhaps a deeper faith or deeper trust of God. And it kind of makes me think of, the well-known story in the Bible when I think on the lake in Galilee, I think, and if they're all asleep and there's a storm and Jesus is actually outside of the boat, appearing to walk on water, and he beckons one of the disciples to come along, come out and have ultimate faith, really. Follow me. All you need is me and belief in me, because nothing else in this physical world, which I have created, says God, needs really matter. So step out of the boat. And at the moment he doesn't believe, then he falls, if you like. So it seems really, and it is really hard, I think, for us generally, with all the noise and environment of what's going on around us in our physical, this world, if you like, which is the short life we will live, in effect, before we move on to another one, heavenly one, is actually to really just dig deeper and deeper in yourself, and to have a deeper sense of faith in trusting God, and all will be well. Because if God made you, he didn't make you to have a terrible life. But if you have faith, you will blossom. And I'd say he always provides. We've actually seen it again and again when people without money and they suddenly have money through, because people come around that they were not expecting and suddenly give them £1,000. It's all manners of rivers, God's rivers that run. Provision. And privileges and stuff like that, which is absolutely amazing. And so I'm not the best person to say it, but I'd say to myself in the mirror, keep having a deeper, deeper faith. Challenge myself again and again to have more depth of faith. And those worries, I think, aren't they? And a lot of the things that we get concerned about get lifted off our shoulders, basically.
What a superb place to press pause and leave the conversation there. There's so much more that I feel we could talk about and questions to come back. So maybe we can get you back up to Manchester again and do part 2, yes, which would be a privilege. So yes. Thank you, Nadim. Thank you, Tanya, for being part of this conversation and for just being honest and open and sharing something of your faith and work with us. It's such a privilege. Thank you.